There's a story there in the newspapers today, Irish Times, Irish Independent, and it's getting a bit of coverage, and it's to do with so-called Celtic Tiger publican couple secure court write-off of 2.8 million of debt. So this is one of these personal insolvency arrangements. And firstly, obviously, the personal insolvency arrangement is open to anybody with personal insolvency issues or debts, significant debts. So it's scheme or various schemes, various arrangements which are very, very useful for anybody with debt. If you're in debt, I would strongly recommend that you look into this personal insolvency arrangements. And they've written off 2.8 million. The banks had debts totaling, the people involved, the Cannings from, I think, Slane, County Meath, had debts of Graham and Bernie Canning from Slane, County Meath. They had debts of 3.2 million, mainly to Bank of Ireland, of which 2.8 million was unsecured. It's been written off now pursuant to this personal insolvency arrangement. But what caught my attention was the following statement. Mr. Canning was agreeable to the family home being sold to the housing body and rented back to Miss Canning. So the couple in question, I think, have split up, but the property, the family home, is being surrendered to the housing body and or sold to the housing body and rented back to Miss Canning. This reminds me of a couple of situations there that I've come across in the last few weeks, where the person who comes into me and who is my client are entering into or have entered into a mortgage to rent arrangement. This is a good scheme if you are in these particular circumstances. Obviously you need to get advice and so on, but the mortgage to rent scheme is a government scheme. It helps homeowners who are at risk of losing their homes due to mortgage arrears. It allows the homeowners in mortgage difficulty switch from owning their home to renting it as social housing tenants. The scheme is overseen by the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, and it's administered by the Housing Agency. The mortgage to rent scheme is a social housing option, only available if you're eligible for social housing support and your mortgage is unsustainable. Under the scheme, you voluntarily surrender ownership of your home to your mortgage lender. This means you give up ownership of the property. Under the mortgage to rent scheme, an approved housing body or a private company can buy your home after you voluntarily surrender it to your lender. So approved housing bodies are independent, not-for-profit organisations. They're also known as housing associations or voluntary housing associations. They provide affordable rented housing for people who cannot afford to pay private sector rents or buy their own homes. Private companies are approved by the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage for the delivery of the MTR scheme and have been set up for this specific purpose and are registered with the CRO. So the homeowner no longer owns the home or have any financial interest in it, but you would continue to live there as a tenant of the local authority or approved housing body. You pay an affordable rent which is based on your income. So if your income increases, the rent increases, but if your income falls, the rent decreases. This means that your rent is always affordable. Under the scheme, you become a social housing tenant with a right to have your housing needs met by the local authority indefinitely. This means that if your needs change, the local authority will provide alternative accommodation that meets your changed needs. Any change to your housing circumstance will be made in consultation with you. So you can approach your lender and you can ask to be considered for the mortgage to rent scheme. The Avail service, which is funded by the state, can assist you with this. If your lender does not consider you suitable for the mortgage to rent scheme, they must inform you of the reason in writing. Bottom line is, you surrender your house. You may have debts on the property that are unsustainable. You simply can't afford them, but you surrender your house to the lender. The lender sells the house to an approved housing body or a private company, and the property is then rented to you, let to you, and it's administered, as I say, by the department or the local authority, Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. It's administered by the Housing Agency. So it's a good scheme if you're in those circumstances. Mortgage to rent, I've come across a couple of those deals there recently, and the people involved are happy because they know they're going to live in that house for the rest of their life, for indefinitely, and they know that they will have an affordable rent. Hope you find this video useful. If you do, I would appreciate if you gave it the thumbs up down below. Thanks a lot.